7 days into the invasion. A group of officials in Brussels are staring at a list of names. Banks, Russian banks, 11 of them. At 6:14 in the morning, they make a decision. And within 48 hours, the 11th largest economy on Earth is partially cut off from the global financial system. No missiles, no naval blockades, no troops crossing any border. Foreign reserves, frozen. Cross-border bank settlements, dead. Russian corporations trying to pay suppliers abroad, blocked. Just a switch. That switch has a name. It runs through a network most people have never heard of. And today, right now, over 100 countries are quietly spending billions of dollars building a way around it. Not because they're planning war with America, because they watched what happened to Russia, and they made a calculation. My name is Marcus. In the next 14 minutes, I want to show you 3 things. First, how SWIFT actually works. Not the surface description, the real mechanism. Because almost everyone who explains it gets the first fact wrong, and if you get that wrong, you never understand where the power actually comes from. Second, why the United States has an off switch for the global financial system that no treaty, no vote, and no international body gave it, and how a network headquartered in Belgium became an instrument of American foreign policy. Third, why using that switch in 2022 may turn out to be one of the most consequential strategic miscalculations in the history of American financial dominance. Not because it failed, because it worked perfectly, and the whole world was watching. The weapon's power comes from its exclusivity. The moment the world sees the weapon, they start building a shield. Before we go any further, I want your answer right now, in the comments. Simple question. Should the United States have a unilateral off switch for the global financial system? Yes or no? I'll read the most interesting responses before this video ends. Drop your answer below. I'll be back. Almost every article, every video, every explainer about SWIFT starts with the same sentence. SWIFT is the system that moves money between banks around the world. That sentence is wrong. SWIFT does not move money. It moves messages. And that distinction, the gap between moving money and moving the messages that coordinate money, is the entire foundation of its power. SWIFT stands for the Society for Worldwide Interbank Financial Telecommunication. Founded in 1973 by 239 banks across 15 countries who had one specific problem. Their communication systems were incompatible. A payment that should have been automatic required phone calls, telexes, and human confirmation at every step. It was slow. It was expensive. It broke constantly. SWIFT fixed that by creating a single standardized messaging language for banks and a secure private network to carry those messages. Today, over 11,000 financial institutions in more than 200 countries use it. 45 million messages every single day. If the global financial system is a nervous system, SWIFT is the spinal cord. Not the muscles. Not the blood. The part that carries the signal. Here is what most explanations skip. What those 45 million messages actually accomplish in a real transaction. A bank in Mumbai wants to send $1 million to a bank in São Paulo. Simple, right? Just move the money. But here's the problem. The Mumbai bank doesn't hold Brazilian reais. The São Paulo bank doesn't hold US dollars held by the Mumbai bank. Neither institution holds an account at the other. They need an intermediary, what the industry calls a correspondent bank. A third institution that holds accounts in both currencies and can coordinate the transfer between them. SWIFT transmits the instruction to that correspondent bank. The message says, debit this account, credit that account, reference this transaction code, confirmed at this timestamp. Without that message, the correspondent bank doesn't know the transfer is coming. Without the confirmation flowing back, the Mumbai bank doesn't know it landed. Without synchronized confirmation threading through the network, the transaction never settles. Modern international finance is not built on cash moving between countries. It is built on synchronized trust. Thousands of institutions simultaneously agreeing, in real time, that value has moved from one ledger to another. SWIFT is the system that synchronizes that agreement. That is the source of its power. And that is exactly why removing a country from it is not symbolic. It is structural. It doesn't slow transactions down. It breaks the coordination layer entirely. SWIFT is headquartered in La Hulpe, Belgium. It operates under Belgian law and European Union regulation. On paper, it is a cooperative, owned by its member banks, governed by an international board. So here is the question nobody asks out loud. How does the United States, a country with no formal governance role in SWIFT, have the effective power to decide who gets removed from it? The answer is not about SWIFT at all. The answer is correspondent banking. Specifically, dollar correspondent banking. Walk through any significant international transaction, any trade deal, any commodity purchase, any cross-border investment, and you will hit a dollar clearing step. Not because every country involved wants to use dollars, because the dollar is the world's reserve currency, and the deepest, most liquid settlement layer for international trade runs through U.S. dollar accounts. Those accounts are held at a very small number of American correspondent banks: J.P. Morgan Chase, Citibank, Bank of New York Mellon, Wells Fargo. Between these four institutions, the vast majority of global dollar clearing flows. And every one of those banks operates under U.S. law, including the authority of OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, the Treasury Division that administers the American sanctions regime. Here is what that means in practice. Imagine you are a Russian bank that was not directly removed from SWIFT. You can technically still send SWIFT messages. Your messages still travel through the network. But the moment those messages involve dollar transactions, which most significant international trade does, they route through a U.S. correspondent bank, and that bank is legally prohibited from processing them. Belgium hosts the network. America controls what it connects to. That is not a coincidence. It is architecture. SWIFT is the pipe. Dollar clearing is the water supply. The United States controls the water supply. In February 2022, for the first time against a G20 economy, America turned both off at the same time. What America built with SWIFT and dollar clearing is not a new idea. The mechanism is identical to something Britain constructed 150 years ago. And what happened to that system tells us almost exactly what happens next. By 1870, Britain controlled approximately 70% of the world's undersea telegraph cable network. These cables were the SWIFT of the 19th century. How banks transmitted payment instructions, how governments sent diplomatic messages, how merchants confirmed commodity shipments and insurance premiums across oceans. Whoever controls the communication layer doesn't need to control every bank. They control coordination, and coordination is everything. When World War I began in August 1914, one of Britain's first military actions, within hours of the declaration of war, was to cut Germany's 5 undersea telegraph cables. Germany was immediately isolated from global financial communication. Its banks could not reliably coordinate international settlements. Its government could not communicate with embassies abroad without going through a network it didn't control. After Britain cut Germany's cables, Germany still needed to communicate internationally. The only remaining cable that wasn't cut ran through the United States. Germany had no choice. They used it. Britain was monitoring that cable. Every German diplomatic communication routed through that cable for the next 2 years was being read by British intelligence, including in January 1917, a message from the German Foreign Secretary to the German ambassador in Mexico. The message offered Mexico a military alliance, German support for Mexico to reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona, in exchange for attacking the United States if America entered the war. The Zimmermann telegram, intercepted, decoded, and handed directly to Washington. It was the single most important intelligence success of World War I for the Allies, and it was made possible because Germany, cut off from its own cables, was forced to use the cable its enemy was monitoring. When you cut someone off from their infrastructure, you don't just weaken them, you force them onto yours, and yours is monitored. Britain's cable monopoly did not last forever. Alternative cables were laid. Technology diversified. By the 1930s, the stranglehold was gone. The question for SWIFT is whether it faces the same trajectory, not collapse, erosion of exclusivity, and the Russia decision just accelerated that erosion by a decade. Pause for a second. Which country do you think makes the most meaningful move away from SWIFT in the next 3 years? China, India, Saudi Arabia, or someone no one is talking about? Drop your prediction in the comments. I'll pin the most interesting analysis. After the Russia SWIFT exclusion in February 2022, the response from every country with a complicated relationship with Washington was not panic. It was engineering. Quiet, well-funded, systematic engineering of alternative rails. Here are the actual numbers. CIPS, the cross-border interbank payment system, processed approximately $1.8 trillion in 2016. By 2023, that number had grown to $12 trillion. 12 trillion sounds enormous until you compare it to SWIFT, which handles roughly 150 trillion annually. CIPS is currently at about 8% of SWIFT's volume. But here is the number that matters. CIPS is growing at approximately 25% per year. SWIFT's growth is in the low single digits. 8% is not a competitor. It's an exit ramp. And exit ramps change behavior even before most people start using them. mBridge is the most technically ambitious alternative, and also the least discussed. Developed by the Bank for International Settlements, the central bank of central banks, in partnership with the central banks of China, the UAE, Hong Kong, and Thailand. In 2024, it completed its first live cross-border settlements using real central bank money. Not test funds. Real settlements. On a platform with no SWIFT messaging requirement and no dollar clearing choke point. 6 additional central banks are currently applying to join. And then there are the arrangements that don't require any new infrastructure at all. India and Russia now settle approximately 60% of their energy trade in rupees and rubles, entirely bypassing dollar clearing. In 2023, Saudi Arabia accepted yuan for oil sales to China. The first time in 50 years that oil has been priced and settled outside the dollar between those two parties. None of these replace SWIFT today. The right question is not whether SWIFT is being replaced. The question is SWIFT becoming optional? Because optional systems lose monopoly power, even when they remain the dominant choice for most transactions. SWIFT's advantages are real, and they are not going away on any short timeline. Financial institutions do not switch communication infrastructure the way consumers switch apps. The integration costs, technical, legal, compliance, operational, are staggering. A mid-sized international bank migrating from SWIFT would be looking at years of transition work and hundreds of millions in costs. SWIFT's value comes from the fact that 11,000 institutions are on it. Network effects of that scale are not dislodged by a competitor at 8% of volume, however fast it's growing. So no, SWIFT is not collapsing. The risk is subtler, and more dangerous precisely because it is subtle. The United States has spent the past decade treating SWIFT access as an instrument of foreign policy. Every time it has done that, Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, and now Russia, it has given the watching world another reason to invest in alternative rails. Not because those countries are planning conflict with America, because rational actors do not leave existential dependencies unaddressed once they've been clearly demonstrated. The weapon's power comes from its exclusivity. The moment it becomes one option among several, even if it remains the largest, you cannot threaten someone with a weapon they've already built a shield against. There's a historical pattern here that keeps repeating. Britain weaponized its telegraph cables. Rome weaponized its roads. The Dutch weaponized their trade routes. Weaponizing infrastructure is what dominant powers do. It is how they enforce compliance without constant military engagement. The problem is not the weapon itself. The problem is that every time you use it publicly, in front of the entire world, you write the instruction manual for the antidote. The United States used the full SWIFT weapon against a G20 economy for the first time in 2022. The world watched. The engineering started the next day, and unlike Britain's cable monopoly, which took 2 decades to meaningfully erode, countries building SWIFT alternatives are doing it in an era where financial infrastructure can be built and interconnected in years rather than decades. SWIFT is not neutral financial plumbing. It was built by institutions embedded in the American-aligned financial system. It connects to a dollar clearing architecture under American legal jurisdiction, and it has been used as an explicit instrument of American foreign policy, publicly, against a major economy, in a way the entire world observed. That does not make it illegitimate. Every major power in history has built financial infrastructure and eventually used it as leverage. The question is never whether you'll use the weapon. The question is, what happens to your power after you do? Empires don't fall when their systems are challenged. They fall when their systems lose exclusivity. And exclusivity, once lost, has never been recovered in the history of financial infrastructure. SWIFT is still the most powerful financial architecture ever constructed. This is not a collapse story. It is a competition story. And in competition stories, the entity that built the dominant system doesn't always win. Ask the people who built Blockbuster. The comments on this video are going to be interesting. I told you I'd come back to the yes or no question. Here's what I actually think, and why the answer is more complicated than either side wants to admit. The United States should have the ability to sanction actors who finance terrorism, weapons proliferation, and atrocities. That is a legitimate use of financial leverage, and almost no serious person argues otherwise. The problem is that legitimate use, and this specific war against this specific country at this specific moment in history, are not the same question. The mechanism is real. The power is real. What it costs to use that power, that's what this whole channel is about. In 1974, the United States and Saudi Arabia signed a secret agreement. It wasn't about oil. It was about something more powerful than oil, about which currency oil would be priced in. That agreement held for 50 years, and right now, for the first time, it is visibly and measurably coming apart. That video is up next. Welcome to the geopolitics of money.